Hello friends, in the series which we are doing on the making of contemporary India 1950 to 1990s, today we will talk about the developments in the 1980s coalition politics. As all of us are aware that when India became independent and Congress party was the single largest party as well as the majority party in the Indian politics, and how it was able to control the Indian politics and the government for quite some time, and we do not find that any kind of a coalition government functioned before the elections of 1977, because before that Congress was the dominant political party. And in 1980s we see that the coalition governments, they began to start in India, and thereafter for around 25 years till 2014 we find that most of all the governments which were there, they were the coalition governments. They were not able to secure the absolute majority in that sense. And when we tend to understand the political developments of the 1980s, we find that there was a lot of tumult, a lot of confusion with regard to the governments, as many of the governments during this time they were not able to continue for a considerable period of time, and a number of prime ministers, they got changed during this particular period, especially in 1980s. So to refer to some of the readings in that context, Bipin Chandra's India After Independence, Ramchandra Guha, India After Gandhi, Seema Mustafa, The Lonely Prophet, VP Singh, A Political Biography. And when you can refer all these books when you are talking about the developments in the 1980s, when you are talking about the 1980s in the context of the political situation, then we find that how in the context of the background, the crusade which was initiated by VP Singh in the context of the corruption and the way he was being expelled from the Congress in 1987, and it touched a lot of people, and in a way it touched the sensitive chord of the masses. And it was also being talked about that how the corruption at the lower levels of bureaucracy was an issue of everyday concern for all the citizens of those times, and it was widely felt that high level corruption, it created conditions of legitimacy for lower level variety as well. And we find that how during this period VP Singh was able to get a lot of support of the wide range of forces in which diverse kinds of functionaries, diverse kinds of people, they got included, like the Sarvodaya workers, the trade unionists such as Datta Samant, farmers movement which was led by Charat Joshi in Maharashtra, and a small and some sections of the radical anti-Congress intellectuals. So all of them, they provided support to VP Singh, and we find that the way he functioned at that point of time, he wanted to fashion some kind of a political strategy for isolating Rajiv Gandhi, and he in a way came together or joined together with those congressmen who had become estranged with Rajiv Gandhi. And we find that some people, those who were close to Rajiv Gandhi, for example Arif Muhammad Khan, who was very close to him, and he was able to achieve some kind of a fame by resigning on the issue of Shah Bano case, as we have talked in earlier lectures as well, that the issue of Shah Bano case became very, very relevant in the context of Indian judicial system as well as the Indian politics, that how women, Muslim women who was divorced by her husband, and this issue became very controversial because Shah Bano was given maintenance by the Supreme Court, and how the orthodox sections of the society, the Muslims, they opposed it on the ground that how it was interfering with the Muslim personal law. And Rajiv Gandhi government came under a lot of pressure because of this, and there was a lot of agitation in this context, and what we see that how Rajiv Gandhi wilted under this kind of a pressure, and because of the pressure as well as the close advisors, they suggested him to introduce a bill to negate the judgment which was given in the Shah Bano case. And we find that the way a legislation came, and the judgment which was given by the Supreme Court was negated, because of which we find that in the at the initial level, the kind of support which Rajiv had in context of the Muslim support, he lost it, and then when he changed his mind, then he also lost the Hindu support as well, as he was seen appeasing the Muslims. So in a way, we find that Arif Muhammad Khan presented a very good defense in the parliament with regard to the Supreme Court judgment. But when this kind of a law was introduced, then Arif Muhammad Khan felt that he resigned, and he did not like this kind of a thing which was being done. And we find that this was also some kind of a turnaround in the fortunes of Rajiv Gandhi as well, and how the people, those who were not happy in some way with Rajiv Gandhi, they came together, and how Arif was joined in by Arun Nehru, and he was the estranged cousin of Rajiv Gandhi, and other people like VP Singh, Arif Muhammad Khan, Arun Nehru, they were being joined by VC Shukla, Satpal Malik, and some of the other Congress dissidents, those who were there, and they formed Jan Morcha or People's Front on 2nd October 1987. And we find that how VP Singh began to build an anti-Rajiv political bloc. So the intention of VP Singh in this context was to get to bring together a lot of people, those who were not in favor of Rajiv Gandhi, those who were opposing Rajiv Gandhi, and he wanted to harness that kind of energy which was there in terms of opposition to Rajiv Gandhi, and he made a lot of efforts that how these kinds of elements, they should come together so that they can have some kind of a combined strength against the Congress government and the Congress party. And we also find that left and the BJP, they also had that inherent anti-Congressism, and they also were in a way supporting VP Singh, and how VP Singh was able to secure a resounding victory in Allahabad by-election in June 1988 against the Congress, in which the Bofors gun had become unofficial campaign symbol, and it convinced them that he was the answer to their anti-Congress prayers. So we find that other political parties, many of them single-handedly were not in a position to take on the Congress, but when they came together, when they combined, and then when they provided support to the people, those who were ready to fight the Congress at all levels, then these parties, they were able to increase their vote share as well as the number of seats which they had earlier secured in the Lok Sabha elections. So we find that how VP Singh was seen by them as some sort of a symbol, as well as the person who can take on the Congress. And we also find that left parties, they talked about that how they did not have any kind of a connection with BJP, but it is a fact that they were fully aware of VP Singh's dealings with the BJP. And when we see the kind of developments in the 1980s, in the later part, especially in 1989, we find that how Congress, which was a dominant party earlier, especially in 1984 to 1989, that how Congress had a huge majority in Lok Sabha, and but in these elections, Congress was in a way was reduced to only 197 seats and 39.5 vote share. And Rajiv Gandhi, he made it clear that he was not interested in forming the government, as the mandate was not in the favor of Congress. And what happened during this period was that how the left parties and the BJP, they in a way declared that they would support National Front government from outside, and we find that the stage was set for the second non-Congress government in post-independence India to take office. And if you see the figures, then National Front had won 146 seats, and it was supported by BJP with 86 seats and left parties with 52 seats. So how the left front government was able to secure outside support from these two political formations. And we find that when we tend to understand the way the government was functioning, then the beginnings were not very smooth, and how Chandrasekhar was opposed to VP Singh as the Prime Minister, and how Devilal insisted that he should be made as the Deputy Prime Minister. And when the elections they got over, we find that all differences which were being caused by the clashing ambitions of the people, oversized egos, ideological preferences of the people, those who were against the Congress, then all of them came to the forefront, and it was with some difficulty that VP Singh became the Prime Minister in 1989 December, accompanied only by Devilal as the Deputy Prime Minister. So we find that there was a lot of distrust between and amongst individuals, and this kind of a distrust became more apparent later when even at the swearing in ceremony, where we find that Devilal he insisted on inserting the term Deputy Prime Minister into the oath, despite the President's gentle admonition that he should only say Minister, as if he was not sure that the Prime Minister would stick to his promise. So this kind of a distrust between the individuals, those who were forming the government now, was not a good signal for the government, and at the same time for the democracy as well. Because if the people, those who are at the helm of affairs, they will not have some kind of an trust between each other or amongst each other, then it will be very difficult that they would be able to serve the people for whom they have been elected. So we find that this kind of a situation which was apparent at this point of time, and because of which we also see that how the governments they did not last for the entire duration for the 5 years, and these coalition governments, we find that they toppled quite often during this particular period of 1990s. And we also find that a lot of noises they were being made by VP Singh in the context of reversing the Congress policies, and it was typical of his administration that high sounding words they were being made, but at the same time they did not lead to anywhere. And the situation in Punjab and Kashmir, it deteriorated during this time. And how we also see that George Fernandes, who was the head of the Kashmir Affairs Committee, he was there, but at the same time Arun Nehru and Mufti Muhammad Saeed, they were continuing in the affairs of Kashmir at that point of time. And we also find that how VP Singh, without consulting anybody, he appointed Jagmohan as the governor of Kashmir. And when this kind of a situation, when Jagmohan was appointed as the governor of Kashmir, then the Farooq Abdullah, who was the chief minister of Kashmir, he resigned in protest, since Jagmohan was a man who had cost him his chief ministership in 1983 by encouraging the defections against him. So that was the kind of a situation in which these kinds of functionaries they were getting involved. And how we find that in this kind of a situation where the political functionaries, those who were there at that point of time, they were in a way in such kind of a relationship between each other, and they had to function in unison in that way, that how the chief minister of a state and how the governor of a state, they had to work together for the betterment of that particular state. And we have also to see that how Kashmir as a volatile kind of a situation, And when this was not happening at that point of time, it created some kind of further problems in terms of administration. And we find that during this time how the assembly was dissolved, and when VP Singh recalled him and he was made the Rajya Sabha member at that point of time to mollify him. And we find that when we tend to understand the way national government functioned, we find that apart from completing the withdrawal of the Indian troops from Sri Lanka and settling trade and transit dispute with Nepal, there was little that the national government had to show for itself. It did not engage in many kinds of initiatives we do not find many more achievements of the governments, and apart from these kinds of things, the national government was not able to achieve much. And we also find that how the way it had some kind of a clout with BJP as well as the Muslim leaders, but both of them, they were not brought together, and the resolution of the Ayodhya dispute, Ayodhya temple, which could have taken place at that point of time, that was also not taken up, and it could not be done. And we also find that the Rath Yatra, which was initiated by Lal Krishna Advani, it also created that kind of a passions, as the Mandal aroused the issue of the caste feelings. So we find that during this period, these kinds of developments which were happening in the context of the Rath Yatra, or for that matter the Mandal politics, both of them, they were unsettling in the context of the Indian situation. And we also find that the way the situation was unfolding in the 1980s and in the earlier part of earlier part of the 90s as well. And when the different political leaders or maybe were coming as prime ministers at different points of time, and they were not able to create that kind of an impression which was there when the government was comparatively more stable. And one of the main concerns at this point of time which could be seen is that how a lot of time and energy it was being spent in terms of trying to resolve the internal differences between the various leaders. And we also find that the way Devi Lal's son O.P. Chautala was made the Chief Minister of Haryana once Devi Lal became the Deputy Prime Minister. So these kinds of developments where the son succeeded father, and how there was also a scandal during that point of time where the Chautala's attempt to seek election from Meham, as inquiries established that the large-scale rigging and physical intimidation of voters had occurred, and election was countermanded by the Election Commission. So all these things they were adding to the situation of confusion at that point of time. And when Chautala resigned as the Chief Minister, he was reinstated 2 months later. And we find that how Arif Muhammad Khan and Arun Nehru, they resigned from the government, and then there were some kind of reassurances as well, and VP Singh was persuaded to continue after assurances of Chautala stepping down. So this kind of a situation where some kind of charges they were pressed against Chautala created some kind of a political crisis at that point of time. And we also find that how Devi Lal, he accused Arif Muhammad Khan and Arun Nehru of corruption and produced a letter purportedly written by VP Singh to the President of India in 1987, accusing them of involvement in the Bofors deal. And this letter, as VP Singh claimed, was a badly disguised forgery, and he dismissed Devi Lal on 1st August 1990. So this kind of a situation was created at this point of time, and Devi Lal, he gave a call for a big peasants rally in Delhi on 9th August 1990 to show VP Singh his true strength. And scholars like Bipin Chandra, they have argued that it is widely believed that rattled by this threat and wanting to divert attention, he on 7th August announced in Parliament that report of Mandal Commission appointed by Janata government 1977-79 and quietly ignored by Mrs. Gandhi, it would be implemented. So Bipin Chandra argues that the kind of threat which was being given by Devi Lal was seen by VP Singh that he would not be able to in a way control that particular kind of a situation, and he got alarmed because of the threat which was given by Devi Lal, and thereafter he made this kind of an announcement that he is going to in a way the Mandal Commission report, he is going to implement that. And Mandal Commission talked about that how the 27% of jobs in the government services and the public undertakings, they would be reserved for the candidates, those who belong to the backward caste. And the recommendations which would be implemented later were the reservations in the educational institutions and the promotions as well. So in terms of the way the Mandal Commission report was seen, that this kind of an announcement by VP Singh, it was greeted with dismay and anger at that point of time, and even those who did not disagree with the decision in the principle, they were upset at the sudden announcement as well as the arbitrary manner in which this announcement was made. And VP Singh did not even consult the close associates before making this kind of an announcement, and many leaders, they were unhappy with the way this announcement was being made, and he was criticized for this issue, and there were a lot of criticism that the way the Mandal Commission report was to be implemented, it was questioned on at the timing that it should have been thought about and it should have been discussed at all levels before being announced. And he was also criticized on the issue of the lack of the effort to build any kind of a consensus, to divisive nature of the move, that how the move is going to divide people, and the way the faulty criteria was being used for identifying the backward caste. So we find that some of the political parties like CPM, they wanted the economic criteria to be used as a basis of reservation, and many others, they agreed with this kind of a view. So with regard to the issue of economic criteria, we find that the economically weaker section, this kind of a reservation has been given in the recent times by the BJP government, and this idea of giving reservation on the economic concerns was being talked about in the 1990s as well, but it was being rejected, it was not being accepted, and it was accepted in the later times, especially now when this kind of a reservation has been given. So there was a lot of criticism of the way Mandal Commission report was being implemented, and there were a lot of concerns with regard to the identification of the backward caste, the way it was being done, the methods, they were considered to be outdated, and the changes in the social structure since independence, they were also not being taken into account. And the people, those who were critics, even Bipin Chandra has criticized, and there were other sociologists, those who have seen this kind of a phenomena, and they have argued that the castes which were called as the backward castes, they were the sections who were the major beneficiaries of the land reforms and the Green Revolution, and they could hardly claim special treatment on grounds of backwardness. So this was being argued that some kind of a better method in terms of identifying the backward caste was to be utilized, and they were to reject any kind of outdated methods which were being used in the context of the identification of the backward caste. And the people, those who were already major beneficiaries of the earlier programs of the government, like the program of the land reforms and the Green Revolution, So they should not be given any kind of a special treatment on the grounds of the backwardness. So these were some of the developments of the 1980s and early 90s, and we find that this era of the coalition politics, where we find that different prime ministers, they came of different political parties and different setup and the background, and they had their own ideas with regard to the functioning of the government. And in that context, we will talk further in our next lecture about the kind of coalition politics of the 1980s and the 90s. Till then, thank you very much. So with this, I would like to conclude that these were some of the important concerns, and rest of it we will discuss in our next lecture. Thank you very much.